So dear colleagues, dear friends, we have a great keynote speaker here today. He's a neurologist and professor and works at the Charité in Berlin. He's director of the Department of Experimental Neurology. He's director of the Center of Stroke Research Berlin and founding director of QUEST, the Center for Transforming Biomedical Research. His aims are at overcoming the roadblocks of translational medicine, to detect true innovations and to increase the value of clinical and preclinical medicine. He has showed in impressive ways how we can improve the way we do research, how we better support clinical researchers and promote early career scientists. So we are more than delighted to work with him on several questions and projects. And in the next minutes, he will show us how we can transform biomedical research using the lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis to improve clinical research, also here in Basel. So thank you very much for your attention to my words and welcome very much, Ulrich Dirnagl. The screen is yours.
Lars, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and also see my slides. So that's great. Thank you for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to discuss with you something that I think is very topical and revolves mostly around the question how good we are faring with COVID-related research, how this compares to the research that we did before. And as a disclaimer, I have to say that what I'm presenting is not a systematic review, and it's kind of, you might argue that there's a severe limitation. It's kind of cherry picking, but I have selected, I think, examples that I find typical. So, but please be careful. Unless you have lived under a stone, you must be aware of the fact that even years ago, we were in the midst of a discussion about the veracity of science, in particular in biomedicine. Not only in biomedicine, I have to say, but particularly there. And there's the sort of the mantra of the reproducibility crisis. But in a more systematic way, I think this was addressed by a series of papers in The Lancet in 2014, where in 5 different papers, an analysis was done on how biomedical research is done with respect to how relevant the research questions are, how appropriate the research methods are, how efficient the regulation is, how accessible this type of research is in terms of the results, and whether we get unbiased reports. And the answer, as you may have guessed, was a bit disappointing, and a lot of room for improvement, I think, was identified. And since then, I think there's quite some activities. Now, about a year ago, COVID, the virus, struck us. And since then, we have seen a flurry of research, and that is no surprise. I mean, it's a pandemic, it's an international crisis. And amazingly, 4% of the research outputs in medicine of the year 2020, 4% of this was devoted to research on coronavirus. Now, this is not surprising, and it's also not surprising that it has led to a flurry, to almost a tsunami of research outputs. And if you go into PubMed, you will find 100,000 COVID-related papers. If you look into how many trials are ongoing in CT-Gov, you will find more than 4,000 right now, increasing. And obviously we have these not only the peer-reviewed papers, but we also have now a very high fraction of unreviewed papers on preprint servers. So this is dramatic and unexpected, if you wish. Now, if I'm trying to project now what has been done over the last year or so in COVID research on those questions that were addressed by this Lancet series, let's just look at some of those. And one important thing, obviously, is how relevant is the research that is done for the users of the research. And here I would just like to point to the fact, and it's very handy and very easy to get this type of information because of the COVID evidence database. That is an initiative that Lars has started. It's easy to find out that there are hundreds of studies on chloroquine. Who needs them? And in fact, they will never produce any results. On the other hand, we don't have practically any, you can almost argue any studies, controlled trials on interventions on non-pharmacological measures against COVID. You can actually list them on one hand. Most of them in Scandinavia, and the one that's here on the screen, the school closing trial, even never happened because of problems with ethics, with political problems and so forth. So actually you can argue we don't have any evidence on how non-pharmacological interventions work and which ones are better and which ones we can just forget about. This is amazing. I mean, this is frightening, I have to say. Then it's also not surprising that if you look at whether the full research reports or any research results are available, we are not really in a good state. So it's becoming clear that trial result reporting is as bad or maybe even worse than we have seen before. And that, of course, is a major problem in a situation where we need to act swiftly. So we would want to see the results of those trials. And so in this systematic review, meta-analysis, it was found that about 40% of the completed trials do not, on CT-Gov, do not give summary results. I mean, it would be so easy to do that, but we don't see them there. And that is, of course, not good. If we look at the question of how appropriate are the research designs and conduct and analysis of those studies, there are also some, well, alarming signs. This is from a recent study from Deborah Sarin and Stephen Rosenfeld, and they were looking at the question how harmonized ordinal disease scales are in COVID research. And it's almost crazy. I mean, this is kind of the summary result that they list here. But so there are numerous ordinal scales that are used in these papers, and some create their own scale and they use it in only one paper. There are a few that are used in several papers. But to show you, just to show you where the problem lies, if you look at how they code death, you will find that some code death as 1 and some code death as 10. And some have scales that go from 0 to 7, some that go from 0 to 10. And so it's a total mess. And that, of course, and I don't have to tell you, you are the experts, this is a huge problem in evidence synthesis and would be actually pretty straightforward to overcome. Now, there are other signs that we have problems in research design, conduct, and analysis, and that comes from various sources. Here's an interesting one, another one. That's from a very recent report that Tracy Weisgerber of the Quest Center and colleagues have done. And they used automated screening of preprints with various tools. Some of them they developed and some of them are freely available. And they were looking at some features of those preprints that could be extracted with respect to study design and visualizations and so forth. And this reveals, in a very coarse way, if you wish, reveals a lot of problems with internal validity, meaning no randomization, blinding validation, especially also of cell lines, if these are basic research studies, external validity, sex as a biological variable, for example, lack of discussion of limitations and so forth. So this doesn't look good either. And this is a totally different approach, which points to the very similar problem. And this is an article also very recently, I think a few days ago, it appeared as a peer-reviewed paper. And they looked at the top cited papers in clinical COVID research, and they matched them with papers that are non-COVID with similar properties, but the only difference is that they are not, I mean, in terms of study design and so forth, and the difference being just that the disease studied here was COVID. And it turns out that the COVID papers fare much worse with respect to addressing various forms of bias. So it is actually not a big surprise that we see a lot of retractions also, and you are of course aware of I guess the two top ones, New England Journal and the Lancet, but there's much more, and Retraction Watch runs a kind of a daily updated list of COVID retractions. We've seen this before. This is not a new phenomenon, but it just I think it's another signal that there is something. Now there are some systematic reviews on this overarching topic. They come to this conclusion that there is a problem with methodological rigor. There are opinion papers about this already very early on during the pandemic. And there's a very interesting article, which I recommend by Alex London and Jonathan Kimmelman. And they have commented on the fact that we should be very careful not to get into kind of a pandemic research exceptionalism, meaning to argue that, for example, in a situation where time counts, bad data is better than no data. And that's certainly not the case. In fact, methodological rigor, good data is much more important, or even more important than it is under normal conditions. So it's not an excuse to say, well, we can't wait for the good stuff because we now need to act. If you act on bad data, it's even worse than not acting. So coming back to this overall kind of analysis and grouping into various problems, I think it's fair to say that and we don't have real numbers on it, and this obviously will feed a whole institutes with material of meta research. But I think a snapshot of the picture right now shows that it's actually, if anything, we are facing the same problems that we have seen before, and it may have gotten worse even. Now, where there is darkness, there is light, and so as before, there are lots of initiatives of trying to counteract those issues, and that's very good. And I just point out a few of them. I have already mentioned Lars' initiative of synthesizing evidence, and there are a few others out there doing stuff like that. There are very interesting initiatives to collect data on a national level, make it accessible in a safe way for COVID research, and that's the Open Safely initiative in Britain. In Germany, there's an initiative, it's called GELCO, to come up with kind of a national data set, unifying, harmonizing this type of work. We have initiatives that do living evidence synthesis, which I think is very helpful, especially if you're flooded with papers and have to act swift. I have already shown you an example for automated screening as one tool, and this is coming up. I think there's more coming up. We need to do quality control, but I think in principle we know that it's feasible. And this actually, just as a reminder, as a remark, is not only an option to look at fields in general, like how is COVID research doing with respect to blinding and randomization, whatever. That's probably not even very useful. But tools like this, and this is what Tracy Weisgerber and her colleagues do at this, they use this to automatically screen preprints and then notify authors of what they found. And that's an interesting proposition, because then we can ask the question, well, some of this will be false alarm, and then, well, they don't have to react. But if the screening found something, did they act on it? And was then, because we know that 70% or so of the preprints will eventually end up in a peer-reviewed publication, did they take care of this? Did they improve on those reports? So that this is interesting stuff that is going on, and only then, if we see that this is going to change things, we know that it's useful. Another interesting phenomenon which I would point out, and I think that's also not entirely new, but it's highly relevant, I think, is that we see, because this is about speed, this is about and it's about transparency also. So what we are seeing right now is a lot of, in my view, very good stuff in terms of peer review going on Twitter. There's a whole kind of bubble that's called Science Twitter, and I'm sure there's lots of not so good stuff, like in normal reviews, not so good stuff. But it's transparent, it's immediate, and it's accessible to whole communities. And I have to say that I've seen several very good online Twitter reviews of papers, and they appear days after the preprint has become available and so forth. So I think that's and this will be here to stay. Another thing which I would like to point out is that preprints are now, well, it's like an explosion, and now everyone's aware of them. And the critique is obviously, well, this is not peer-reviewed stuff, and we need to be careful. That is true. But we also need to be very careful about peer-reviewed stuff, as we have, for example, seen with the Lancet and the New England Journal paper, which had to be retracted. And so peer review is also not perfect. What I would like to point out is that it's not true that preprints lack a sort of a total quality control. It's just you dump junk. In fact, bioarchive and medRxiv have developed screening processes which are not equivalent to peer review, but are there to exclude junk, to exclude non-science, and also papers that are potentially dangerous in the sense that they make a recommendation for certain therapies. You just can't upload them. So I think there are safeguards, and we should not just bash preprints because of this, because there's some quality. They have an editorial that looks at each page of paper and so forth. I don't know how they do it, because this is crazy how much stuff they get. And I would also like to, and this was on medRxiv, a paper where I believe Lars is the last author, because I mentioned in the beginning that lots of papers that we don't see at least we don't see the summary results, although the studies are completed and we would need to know them right now, because this is a very urgent situation. And so this is a paper that demonstrates that there are methods by, for example, direct contact to the authors to retrieve at least some of this information and then synthesize it. So I'm not saying that it's all bad. I think there's lots of good stuff out there, and there are very structured measures to react to those more problematic zones of research that are going on. But none of this, I have to say, is really new. So in fact, COVID-19 is kind of a magnifying glass. And if you go into Google and you do a search on magnifying glass and COVID-19, you will find that there's hardly any domain, I don't know, maybe fishing or whatever, but there's hardly a domain that does not claim that COVID-19 is a magnifying glass for whatever they do. So in medicine, gender inequalities, colonial attitudes to global health, stuff like that. So, well, yeah, it's probably true. I mean, this is an urgent situation. Everyone's rushing into it. Things are happening that may be not well thought through and so forth. So I think it is true also for this area of avoidable waste. It's a magnifying glass. There is more. It's a bold statement whether there's more of it. I don't know, but there's certainly as much as we have before, and it might be more dangerous than it was before. So that was the first part of my rant, if you wish. But the second part I would like to spend with the question, what can we do about this? And this is not really specific to COVID, because the problem is not specific to COVID. And there are certainly many things we can do. And in fact, many groups, many individuals, many institutions are active in this arena. And a while ago, with a few colleagues, I have written kind of a comment in Nature, where we said, well, isn't this something for institutions, that institutions have a responsibility here? They need to provide resources, they need to provide education, they need to provide incentives. We have done this from a biomedical perspective in particular. And I would just like to highlight, I think there are specific challenges in academic medicine. Don't know about Switzerland. I guess it's not so different from Germany. But a lot of the research that is done after hours. And that is not because our researchers and clinicians are lazy, it's because they are overburdened. They have to see patients, they have to do research, they have to do teaching. And that's quite a bit. The supervisors of a lot of this research have enormous clinical duties. We have a lot of students, medical students, at least in Germany. A lot of the research is done with the help of medical students. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, but they are lacking formal training to do stuff like that. And this, in combination that there's often very little supervision, I told you why I think this is, there is on average, I think, a lack of professionalism. We have short contracts, which brings in the problem of trading expertise. We have, at least in Germany, I have to say, we have a structural underfunding of medical universities. I think our project funding is quite okay, but it's not so useful if you have project funding if the infrastructure is not good. And this may be a key problem here, is that we have perverse incentives in the system, just as a buzzword, publish and perish, or perish. So as a result, actually a bit of a result of this opinion paper in Nature, I have to say, we were able to convince the Berlin Institute of Health, which is a fairly new organization, which acts mostly upon the Charité, large university hospital setting with lots of research, basic and clinical, translational, to invest into a structural initiative. How can we help our researchers and clinicians? And I'm not showing you this because I want to brag about it. I think it's we are testing things, and sometimes we can even provide help. And it's not the only one. And a lot of the stuff that we are doing is either copied from others with their permission, or we're doing it together. So I think this is just an example for what can be done on a university level in this regard. And so just as an overview, and then I will give you some specific examples, which I think relate to the problems that I've shown you before. We group our activities, and it's a team of people into various kind of overlapping themes, and one is quality assurance. So we help with in preclinical and clinical research with standards and guidelines. We do education. We not only preach open science, we help people to do open science. We are changing at least in-house, at least in the realm of the Charité. This is the only thing where we can do this. We are working on changing rewards and incentives. We are trying to get into the business of patient and stakeholder engagement, which is actually fairly new to us. And as an anecdote, I would like to tell you that we did a survey, and when we ask our researchers, or in fact our clinicians, whether they are active in whether they involve patients in their studies, they usually tend to answer with yes. And then if you ask, well, and what is it? Then it's yes, we include them in our studies. So the concept is new for many, and it's also unclear how this is done properly. And there may even be forms of patient and stakeholder engagement that make things worse. We don't know. So there needs to be, we need to be careful about this. We need to do research on it. And this is what we do. We do meta research on all the things we do to identify where we can help, and in fact, whether our measures have any impact. And the other things are not so relevant here. So let me just give you a few examples what this means, and some of it, as I said, we have borrowed from others. So for example, in preclinical research, you may know, and I'm sure that not many of you are in preclinical research, but in clinical research, you are very aware of quality assurance. In fact, it's mandatory in Germany, and I'm sure in Switzerland too, that there is quality management. In preclinical research, there's no quality management. It's even aversive to most researchers, and it's not easy to do it. And so we developed a quality management system for preclinical research, and we're trying to help our researchers to use stuff like that. Another typical example from this realm is critical incidents reporting. You know this from clinics. I mean, we want to learn from mistakes. Do you think preclinical researchers don't make mistakes? No, of course we do. I mean, it's very complex, and there's complex machinery. Do you think there is a systematic way of dealing with errors? No. In fact, most people are trying not to talk about them because it may reflect badly on them, they think. And so we are helping them with a laboratory critical incident reporting, which is anonymous and stuff like that. Now, totally different area has to do with education. And I don't have to tell you how important education is. I just learned that the Department for Clinical Studies is very active in this. And I think this is absolutely key. And here we are copying other formats, and we're collaborating. We don't have to reinvent formats and wisdom in terms of how we and what we teach. But I think this is an extremely important component if we talk about improvement. Again, totally different arena, open science. I mean, it's easy to talk about open science. It's easy to tell people, well, you should publish your negative results because they're important for the community. But then many researchers will tell you, well, how do I do this? Can I do this? No one will be interested, and stuff like that is unheard of. That in my department, we don't do stuff like that. So we have written a tool, a web tool. It's a Shiny app, and it's tailored. It actually, so as a researcher, you can go into it and you can type in what type of data you have, what kind of a study you have, and whether you have any money for it, for the publication, whether you want to be, whatever. I mean, you sort of, you highlight what you want, what you need, and then it is doing, it's making suggestions to you, and it helps you. And if people don't sort of get stuck with it, there's kind of a hotline, and they can ask us how we are doing this. In fact, by the way, this is all this is stuff that we do is published, and it's open science. So it is also available in terms of the software that is behind it. And that's true for the laboratory critical incidents reporting, for the quality management. All those things are obviously not only for us, we're helping others to use them. Now, that's, I think, a very nice example for what meta research can do, and how this relates to action. So we do meta research, and this is in particular, that's Daniel Strech. And he last year published a study where he and colleagues from Freiburg and Hannover did a benchmarking of German clinical university centers, how they are faring with respect to timely publication of results. And he was not only looking at registries, he was also looking at websites, he was looking at obviously at papers and so forth. And so this is just that there's much more of it, but this is just to give you one number. So, and that you will not be surprised, I'm afraid. So in studies where those university medical centers were sponsors, on average, after 2 years, 40% after completion, 2 years after completion, we did not see any result, not in a registry, not in a website, not in a paper. And why is this? Is this blame and shame game? Is this helpful? I think it is, and it is especially if we then make use of this information and try to be better. So this is kind of, this benchmarking, as you can imagine, creates kind of activities locally, because first people say, well, this is impossible and we're much better than this, and then usually it turns out that the numbers are pretty correct. And then the question immediately arises, how can we do better and be not on the lower end of this, but rather on the good side of this? And so this, I think, is very helpful. And then we don't stop there. We shouldn't stop there. So we have to help our researchers to improve result dissemination. And that, of course, again, has to do with education, but only that, it's also taking them by the hands and sometimes uploading results and so forth. And to my understanding, this is exactly what you are already doing in Basel, and maybe you are much better at it than we are. I have to tell you that at the Charité, this was a big problem, and we are now in a much better shape only 1 year after this problem surfaced. I already mentioned patient and stakeholder engagement, and we are doing trainings there, and actually trying to answer the question, how is it done? How can we do it, and how is it done properly? Which I think is a difficult question, and it's also a new one for us. So the last point I want to make here, and I want to point out, is, in my personal view, the incentives and rewards in the academic system are sort of the core of the problem, and also the core of the solution of the problem. If you do not reward quality, you will not get quality. If you reward spectacular results without looking at it, it's beautiful to have spectacular results. Everyone loves it, I mean, myself included. But you at the same time have to look at the veracity of those spectacular results, about their impact and so forth. And impact, I don't mean impact factor, I mean impact for science, impact for society. So if you don't do that, you don't get it. So I think we need to clearly work on this. And so how can this be done? This is very, very kind of, because it's in the engine of the system. It's very hard to work on, especially while the engine is running. But there are ways of doing it, and we are trying it. So just give you a few examples. One is to reward, and this is just one example here, for open data. We want to have our researchers to make the results of their research open, and this is data that comes from patients. This is data that is funded publicly and so forth. So it needs to be publicly available. And we started off in 2017 with an award. You may argue this is crazy. I mean, you're awarding stuff that is kind of, well, they should do it, but well, since it's not done, we started awarding it. It's not big. We gave €1,000 and people had to apply for it. And this was when they were openly sharing data. What did this affect? I think this is a way of starting a discussion, of bringing up topics. And so you get submissions for something and it's not really open data. And then people go back to people and say that, no, you know, this isn't, if you would have done this, you could have had it. And so it brings up topics into the discussion. We have developed this further now, and now we have in our performance-oriented funding scheme at the Charité, which is a little bit of extra money for researchers, which is based on formulas that so far mostly include third-party funding and journal impact factor, I have to admit. But now we have a little component in it that checks, and we have written automated scripts for it. So we are checking the publication record. There are 4,000 papers of the Charité every year, and we're checking which ones have open data, and they get automatically a little bit of extra money for their research. And we are going to turn the screw a little bit further, probably next year, and then it's not just open, then we want it fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So these are ways of incentivizing, of bringing up things, and we don't only have it for data, we have it for an open data reuse award, a patient stakeholder award, a null result award. And so this is, again, this is about no one's getting rich with it, rich in the sense that they can do much research with it. It's the exposure and it's the discussion. What I think, and that's my last example for what we are doing here, is probably open heart surgery and much closer to where things happening. We have, and this very much with the help of our dean, changed the professorship application portal of the Charité. So if you would apply for a professorship at the Charité, maybe some of you have done it or will do it, this is what you will see. And to some of you then, it will come as a surprise that you not only have to hand in like, well, your medical degree, whatever, and your CV, but you are also asked narratives on certain things. And I just show you one thing, and this is our open science narrative. And it says, Charité attaches great importance to transparent, replicable research and supports the objective of open science. This includes, then it says what we mean by this. And then comes the critical question, how have you been pursuing these goals so far, and what are your plans for the future? And now you have 1,000 characters. And you don't need 1,000 characters even, but it's a short narrative. And this is very interesting. And it's kind of a signal also to the outside that this is what the Charité is now interested in. We have a strategy for the Charité 2030, it's called. And this is part of it, that we want this stuff. Responsible research, that's part of our vision. And so people that come to work with us, they should share this vision. So what have you done? And this is the easy part. The hard part is to then make use of this information and get the commissions that then make the decisions to really use this information, and not just, again, look at only the journal impact factor. And this we have not solved, but we are addressing this by a person. We call it the Good Evaluation Practice Officer, which goes into the commissions and talks about these things and asks questions. Does not have a vote, but is part of the commission, like a gender and equality officer. So, lastly, we are doing some benchmarking internally. So this is getting live in a few weeks now. We have a dashboard which is in an automated fashion creates information on how we are doing on many things, like prospective registration, on preprints, on open data, on open access, and so forth. And we will put this also on the web in a few months to the outside. So we would like to be judged by it, and we are inviting others to do the same with us in similar projects. Last point here. while lots of the activities that I've shown you are directed towards the research environment of the Charité and the BIH, I have to say, and I'm very glad that this is the case, we are not alone, and there are so many interesting and relevant activities that are going on, and we are all working together. I should, for example, mention that there are now reproducibility networks, and Switzerland has one, was in fact beating Germany by months in setting it up. We have funders that are really interested in these features now, and in Germany the BMBF is very interested in these issues, and I know that the Swiss National Foundation, is the SNF, is very active in this arena. And so I think that there's lots of interaction, and we're happy to network with you. We're already networking with Lars, and there's huge potential in this. So to finish up, I think my main messages are, and I'm trying to bring it together. One is, not so surprisingly, COVID research is not so different from the type of research that we did before. And in fact, it may highlight a few of the problems in a little bit more accentuated way. And we need to get the story straight. We need to get better in this. We need to get some pandemic preparedness, because we will get into this problem in a few years again, even if we solve it now with a vaccination, which is not even clear at this point. So there's nothing new here, but we have already from before the pandemic, I think, good knowledge on how to improve on these things. And this, I think, and that's my second point, the researchers and the clinicians need help. And they need help on the ground, and we need a different culture for those things. We need to reward a lot more things than we have been rewarding so far. And the good news here is that it's happening, and we should work on it together. And so this is kind of an invitation. And I know actually that in many instances that I've shown, you are even faring better than we are, so we can learn from you, and vice versa. Maybe we have a few things that we have to offer. And it's about little steps. I think if we add little steps, it creates a very solid foundation for research of high value. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uli, for that fascinating and inspirational talk. And from my side, I think you really do not only preach, you offer help, and I think that is critical and fascinating what you're doing. So to all attendees and panelists, please post your questions in the chat. We have some. We also have further information on links about the Swiss Reproducibility Network and other details. So there was one question with the timely publication of studies, what is also something we at the department try to promote for the university hospital. So what have you done concretely in Berlin?
Well, for one, and this is, you could argue it's a bit embarrassing, and I'm sure it was already different in Basel. We at the Charité did not have a registry of all the studies that the Charité is sponsoring, which is crazy, but this was the case. So actually our leadership didn't even know what kind of studies were going on. And so we have created a registry of the sponsored trials of the Charité. And this gives us a handle, and we tied this to the ethics approval. So we know that this is pretty tight in terms of sensitivity and specificity, so we get them all. The good thing about this is then that we also get a handle on automated screening, whether they report their results. That is, and this is not in place yet, but this will become active, and then we will actively approach them if they have not done so. Very friendly in the beginning, and maybe a little bit more pressing after a while. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and I think that's an initiative that we have, where we have learned a lot from Britain, and we all actually physically, we got real help from Britain, was now to upload summary results into all the missing trials. This is ongoing. The Charité, for example, on the European clinical trial tracker, many of you will know it, that's a Ben Goldacre activity. The Charité was, a year ago, was at 2% or so of those trials that should report, had reports. Now we are, I think, I haven't checked this morning now, I think we are 60% or so, and it's kind of going up, and it will at some point be 100%. And that's done by a central agency, by our clinical trial center, and they are uploading it for the researchers. But that is kind of an emergency measure to make things quickly better that have been really bad. But we need a sustainable solution, and that involves teaching. So we have courses on this, and it's much more, I think, also in the minds of our clinical researchers now, because our clinical trial center is now promoting it and so forth. And I should say there are problems in clinical trial, at least in summary reporting, that are not really so much in the hands of us researchers and clinicians, because it's the registries themselves that have, especially the European one, which is very idiosyncratic and creates burdens in doing things like that. So, but even there we can help our researchers understand how they can do this. So it's mostly educational, and it's also about having insight into what is going on, and we were really bad at this.
Thank you. There's another question what certainly has been discussed in many times, but in very short sentences. What do you think is the important stakeholders you need to involve to address waste? Governmental, more regulators? What everybody one size fits all?
The one sentence answer is all of the above, but it's I have a list of my personal list starts with funders, and because the funders are controlling the money in a way. The state funding is also very important, but this goes into infrastructure and support. But this is project funding, and the funders, and that's the good news, know this now, and they are acting. The EU is acting. In Germany, the BMDF is acting. So I think, and the welcome, I mean, it's happening. And so researchers, to get money, will have to do certain things. And they will do it, because otherwise they don't get money. So it's the funders in the first place, and the institutions have to be part of this and have to help their researchers to comply and to do these things. A lot of this is infrastructure and personnel and so forth. And this this is base funding. And so far, in the second one, I would say the second important one are the institutions. And there, it's not only the structures, it's also about incentives. They are there they are honoring what we are doing with positions, with tenure, and they need to include these criteria into tenure and promotion.
Yeah, thank you. And we have this Swiss National Science Foundation, which is, I think, doing a very good job in many good directions here. So that is perhaps something what is really good in Switzerland, but we still have room for improvement, of course. There is another comment, perhaps beyond funding and structures, more in terms of how to get a trial through the committees started in a pandemic situation. Not so much because structural problems, but simply the same as in peer review, people are busy, are sick themselves. Is there something you would suggest to overcome such human problems?
Well, I don't have answers for everything, and I think it's a problem. And I would even point out something that is related to this, which may be even more severe. And that is the fact I was mentioning, that we don't have any evidence, practically any evidence, through randomized controlled trials on our non-pharmacological interventions. And a major reason here may be that it's very hard to not only to come up with a protocol, but then also to get this protocol approved on an ethics level, on a political level, and so forth. And so that's the second and third bottleneck in getting these trials on the road. And I think what frustrates me, I have to say, I mean, I completely understand that this is extremely difficult. Also, what the question obviously implies, that we're all overworked and that things are taking longer and quality sometimes goes down if you have so many things on your table. That is human, there's no way of really getting rid of this. What troubles me really is that we don't have any systematic activities to overcome these problems, if only if it's for the next time we run into this problem. So take the example of randomized controlled trials of NPIs, of non-pharmacological interventions. Yes, it is very hard to do stuff like that, but there is a machinery and there is knowledge on how to do these things. There are people who have done these in education and so forth. And we need to try to get this stuff through ethics, and then this is about ethical issues of of cluster randomized trials and all those things, but it's not done. We should at least try. We are not doing it. So next time we run into this problem, we will face exactly the same problem. So this is what really worries me about this. But to the very question, I don't have a good answer, except that we need to build up not only on intensive care units in terms of respirators and masks and so forth, equipment. We need to be prepared to do clinical trials under those conditions. And there needs to be something that's kind of in place. And then like respirators in the basement, you don't use them, but when you need them, you take them out of the basement. So I think we need the know-how, and we need the structures to do those clinical trials, which we are, I think, completely missing.
Thank you. That is indeed very complex, and yeah, that is pandemic preparedness, actually, on a scientific level and infrastructural level, what perhaps is not so much on the agenda in many fields. So I think we come now to the next session. Uli, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure you provided many insights, and we come back to your offer to help us to get better in Switzerland and Europe. Thank you.